In this video, I'll show how descendants of Paul Dowlin, who married Margaret Brown, get matches with descendants of my ancestor Crawford, Samuel Crawford, who married Mary Crawford. And this suggests that they have a common ancestor. And I think one explanation is it could be we have a common Crawford ancestor. There might be other explanations, but here's what I found. I first began to look at this when an AncestryDNA member and I were corresponding about some Crawfords that we're related to. And this person suggested to me, this ancestry member, that I might be related to John Crawford, who married Jane Brown. I already knew I was related to a Samuel Crawford, was a direct descendant of mine, and that he had married somebody named Mary, but I didn't know who it was. And the ancestry member who I got in touch with said that she had parents, John Crawford and Jane Brown. So to kind of test that, I began looking at the Dowlins. And I noticed there was a Dowlin who married an Elizabeth Crawford. So at that time, then, I had a look at matches to my sister. So I'll go here, and for Dowlin matches. And many people share my matches with me, their matches with me, and we'll go down to them. One of them is my sister, Patricia Crawford. And when somebody shares their matches with you, you're able to see and do searches in their matches, that person's matches. And this can give you clues because we don't all inherit the same DNA, even if we're related to the same ancestor. And so looking at T's, that's my sister's name, T, Patricia Crawford, we'll go to Dowlin. And so I began to take a look at these, and we have here two of the biggest ones are Janet and Parks here. So let's look at Janet. And we'll look at the shared matches with Janet first of all. And notice that one of those matches is Parks. And this is ancestry member who I've gotten in touch with, Doug Parks. And he explained to me what his tree looks like. And so I have an idea of how he fits into the Dowlins. But if we look at Janet's tree, who I've also gotten in touch with, Janet is a descendant of Ernest G. Dowlin, who married Florence Kiger. So now, what I try to do when I have these matches is find out how these people tie into as far back an ancestor as I can, and then try to fit them into my research tree, which is a tree not where I'm showing my direct descendants, but where I show people, I'm able to show them inside an ancestry tree setting. So I have fit Janet into my tree because I've traced her tree back. So we'll go here to Janet. Janet 85, there it is. And we'll see how she is related to the Dowlins. So here's Janet. She goes up through here and then traces further through this Dowlin and goes up through this Dowlin and finally to Paul Dowlin and Margaret Brown. So now let's look at another match. Let's look at Doug Parks and see how he relates. So we'll go to Doug Parks. So that's D.D. Parks, I think. There we go. And we'll trace up here. His path to the Dowlins, which he explained to me, goes up like this. And we get up to Margaret Brown again. So here we have two Dowlins going back to the same person. So now we'll look at the common matches with Janet again. And one was Craig Thomas. So I trace Craig's path also. So we'll go here and we'll trace him up. And he goes up through Seal's family, up to this Dowlin, then up to here, and back up to, he is also related to Paul Dowlin and Margaret Brown. Now, one of the things I did next is I looked at other Crawford descendants of the same Crawfords as me. So if we follow these on up, let's get back to those Crawfords we were looking at. So we had Elizabeth Crawford here, who is Paul Dowlin's sister-in-law. But that could not explain how we're both related, because that's an in-law relationship. So let's go up here. There's John Crawford and Jane Brown. And my Crawford, who I go back to, is Samuel Crawford, who married Mary Crawford. And then his son that I go back to is William Crawford, who married Alzira Doty. Then he goes to Thomas Crawford, who married Sarepta Doughty. And then there's a bunch of children there, and we'll look at one of them off of that branch, off of Thomas, and this is Richard Wirtz. So Richard's related to me, and this will show how. Richard's my second cousin, one time removed, and this will show how. It says that Richard goes up to these Crawfords, and there's Thomas Crawford, the same one I'm related to. And then Thomas comes back to me here. Now, if we'll look at Richard's matches, we go here, and Richard shared his matches with me. So when we go here, I'll choose his test, because he sent me an invite, and I accepted. So there, we go to Richard. And we'll do a search in here for Dowlin. And a couple of people come up. And let's try Scott Wells, who is somebody who I've traced to the Dowlins. So if we look at Scott's tree, you'll see that he comes up. And here's somebody we already saw. We saw Ernest Guy Dowlin and Alan also. So he takes that same path. I've put him in my tree. So if we find my tree, which I know we can do it, we'll go here and we'll do Scott Wells. Show how he's related. And here's his path. On up through like this. All right. Back up to Paul and Margaret. Finally, there is another Crawford descendant who I checked. And that is somebody named Michelle Bunting. And I'll show you how Michelle is related to me. So we'll go to Michelle Bunting. She goes back to the same Samuel and Mary, who we have in common, just like Richard Wirtz does. On up here, Mary Devon, Huddleston and Crawford, Samuel Crawford and Mary Crawford. And it's Mary Crawford here, who has these parents, John Crawford and Jane Brown, who have descendants who married the Dowlins, as we saw. There's David Dowlin. And then that's how we get back down to the Dowlins. But notice that there's no connection that I have to the Dowlins, or that any of the Dowlins have to the Crawfords on Paul Dowlin's side. On David Dowlin's side, yes, David Dowlin's descendants have a way back to the same Crawfords through Elizabeth Crawford. Now, these Dowlins lived near where the Crawfords did, in Pennsylvania. So there's a certain proximity there. While we're looking at Michelle, what I wanted to do was look at her matches, because Michelle shared with me. Search Dowlin. So notice that Michelle gets a match with Doug Parks also. More evidence that the Crawfords who go back to Samuel and Mary have a common ancestor with the Dowlin descendants who go back to Paul Dowlin and Margaret Brown. Now, this Margaret Wenzel is sort of interesting because she shows up here. If I go to she is related to a Dowlin. Let's just show how. I haven't been able to figure out yet to trace this. Nobody has traced this Dowlin back yet, but they could very well be the same ones. They only go back to 1818. That requires a little bit more digging. But if we go to my cousin Crawford, so we'll go to DNA matches. And we'll go to Susan Crawford. And we'll go Dowlin. Notice that Susan has a match also with Monica here. See if we have any common matches. I don't think it's going to help. We could look into these more later. Okay. So what this adds up to is that it looks like we could come up with a theory of why the Crawfords get the matches with the Crawford descendants get matches with the Dowlin descendants. Let's come up real quick. Get over here. Since we saw that all the matches were not to the Dowlin that married a Crawford, but to a Dowlin that looks like we don't see any relation to a Crawford. And in the Crawford descendants, none of them go back to a Dowlin. So why would the Crawford's descendants and the Dowlin descendants of Paul specifically, why would they tend to get a match that points towards them having a common ancestor? Well, the obvious reason is they have a common ancestor, but then we want to try to guess who it could be. If we look at the descendants of Paul Dowlin and Margaret Brown, that provides a clue. So here is one called Crawford Dowlin. Now, why would you name somebody Crawford Dowlin? Usually it would be because that's a family name. So that suggests that there is a Crawford up here somewhere. Maybe it could be as high as up here. There's an Emma, maybe she was a Crawford. Or it could be, given the strength of the matches with Janet, for instance, that it's closer to the current time. So it might be that Margaret Brown was actually a Crawford, or that her mother was a Crawford. Those are two good hypotheses, and there may be some other reason. But if we look down here, there was one more Crawford, if I can find them, in the Crawford name inside it was this guy, I think, William Crawford Dowlin. Again, indicating that the Dowlins included the name Crawford as if they had a Crawford ancestor. So I'm suggesting that maybe they do. Now, what I would like to do is with Dowlin descendants is to share matches with each other, just like I sent an invite to these people and they sent an invite to me, and now I can browse through their matches, my Crawford descendants and so forth. I'd like to be able to send my match view invitation to Dowlin descendants and have them send me theirs. So what it does is, I hope that you can see, is it makes it so you can do more in-depth researching of possible common connections by having available the entire matches of one of your co-descendants to search through to see what common links you can find. For example, Doug Parks showing up in my family's matches, but then showing up also in another Crawford descendants match. I think it was Michelle Bunting's matches. So how to share matches, I'll explain what that is. You go here at Ancestry.com, you go to DNA Results Summary, you come here to Settings, you come down under here to sharing, preferences, and change. And what you do is you put the person's name that you're going to send the invite to down here. You can do collaborator or viewer. I usually do collaborator. So if you see changes you want to make in your family and you know your family better than me, you can go ahead and make them. So to send your matches to me, you type Crawford@gmail.com. And then you hit send invitation, and I will get it, and I'll accept it, and I'll have your matches to browse. At the same time, send me your email, and then I will put your email address in here. I'll send you an invitation to my matches and Patricia's matches, since she gets really good matches with descendants of Dowlins. And then we'll both have better research tools to try to find a common ancestor to explain all the matches between the descendants of Paul Dowlin and Margaret Brown and Samuel Crawford and Mary Crawford.